alfalfa.
Sorry, I was late on that. Sorry to interrupt you, Bryce.
No problem. And so this comes into where I see a lot of issues in organic production. It is a corn soybean rotation where you're applying enough manure to get nitrogen, and your levels of P and K might go really crazy because you're over applying P and K to get the nitrogen. And I'm not saying this is everybody, but I've seen it happen in cases of long-term good organic growers too that get their P and K levels too high, which affects their production of other nutrients into the plant. So any questions, anything else you would like me to go through on these two, Aaron?
Not that, does anyone have any questions for Bryce at this point? I think we're good. And I'm sorry for people getting in late. I didn't realize that when I let Bryce be the host that I was going to mess up my ability to see people that were trying to log in. So glad everyone got in now.
Bryce, did you say that you use magnesium sulfate instead of gypsum to adjust not only sulfur, but getting the mag down in your soils so that you have a lot better soil structure and other things?
Yeah, and so if we go back to the soil test, my calcium problem is due to the soil pH. It's not having a lack of calcium in the soil. So gypsum, well, the sulfur and gypsum would do well for me. The calcium is would be a wasted on the soil without getting the pHs correct first. And that's how I look at it. It's not the only way to look at it, don't get me wrong. So I need a sulfur source. And so I found sulfur, and I knew I was low on manganese. So I found a sulfur manganese source that would allow me to apply that all at one shot.
There's a question, Bryce. Where do you source and store products for fertility?
Yeah, so that is a good question because we've been building into that. And so we source totes for all of our micronutrients, and we have a large machine shed that we store them in. They come in plastic totes, so they're pretty elemental proof if you get them under a roof. We are in the process of building a barn to put all of our chicken manure under. If you leave chicken manure out, there is a good chance of losing a good chunk of the nitrogen out of the top when it rains, and so on and so forth. So we are in the process of building a barn to store all the chicken manure under a roof to do that and bring that in. Otherwise, gypsum, lime is stored at the side of the field that it's going to be spread on. And where do we source? So that is not an easy question to answer. Chicken manure sources, we have 5 or 6 people that we work with to get that. With the micronutrients, we just became a dealer we became a dealer to get our own micronutrients because a lot of people don't carry or want to mess with what we have to purchase. So we just became our own dealer to be able to have access to those. Egg lime, we use the local co-op. It's a naturally mined egg lime out of Fort Dodge that we use for that. For gypsum, most products that we use, we just, and I don't even like doing it, become a dealer, but a lot of people don't have them, or we can't find them anywhere else. So we open channels to be able to get them ourselves. So one of the things that I always talk about with growers I work with the people I meet is agronomics and fertility are matched in one. Having the right rotation and refining this long term really helps our bottom line and to be successful in organic. And I'll say that having alfalfa really allows us to balance out fertility and fertility needs and costs that we're doing. It also allows us to have this rotation that we know we're going to do every year, to start purchasing nutrients ahead, to be ahead of the game, to know what we need, even fuel, equipment, all that stuff. We're about a year ahead doing that stuff, which is really paying off right now. So having that refined long-term good rotation that's agronomic sound really helps reduce the cost of fertility. You can leverage green manure, you can buy earlier. Having your nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus and sulfur and all those balanced out is going to do wonders in the soil. I've seen it farm over farm. When you have those ratios way out of whack, it's really hard to grow a crop. Weeds like it. It's just much more difficult. And supporting that microbial growth to mobilize fertility, having that rotation, a corn soybean rotation. I don't see that in the soil when I see that happening on a farm. But getting a small grain in there, having corn after a small grain is tremendous to yield, the amount of work that needs to be done, to the amount of fertility that needs to occur before that corn is grown. So having that all right, it really builds the soil health and with the diverse plant species and supporting that microbial activity. And so right rotation, I think, is about equal to the actual fertility that you put on the soil in terms of how it all interacts with each other.
And any of your transition acres, have you added any specific microbial inoculants or stimulants to try to enhance that benefit?
So we have tried probably 4 or 5, and we'll continue trying them. The ones that we've tried right now, and they're 1-year things again, so I'm not saying they work or don't work. They haven't really shown up to us in that, and so we really use the microbial stuff in this year. We're trying a new one at $7 an acre. We used it to try to break down corn stalks so we don't have to do as much tillage. And so that's the reason we're using ours. And if we get more breakup of nutrients and availability of the plant, that's great. But for us, the $7 that we're spending, try to eliminate a $15 to $20 pass with big machinery to till that soil. That's a reason we use it right now, or we're trialing the one that we're trialing.
Yeah, I'm interested in that as well, actually, with the more of the residue breakdown for the reasons that you're saying. There's a couple more questions in the chat. One about side dressing, which again is another thing that I'm interested in as well. I'd be curious to hear not only from you, Bryce, but if others have moved to side dressing nutrients in any phase of the crop rotation.
Yeah, and I think side dressing is always a good thing. The bad thing about this is a lot of people get big eyes, and I've seen it a lot, that they want to get this done, but the end of June comes and you've sat on a tractor the entire summer. You're going through that field 6 times. The last thing people want to do is go side dress manure at 1 ton an acre on a cart that holds about 4 or 5 tons to get through that field. It's a long process and it's not easy work. And so I caution everybody to understand what work they're getting into and what time of frame they're doing. July 4th comes for us and we're about beats. And so we haven't done side dressing this year. We've put together a plan to do it with pellets, and I'll show you our rig that is a little bit easier. We're not dragging across the field. It's a little bit easier on everybody. That we will attempt it to see how the logistic parts goes of it, but we don't plan on doing it on a large scale acres yet, just because there's not a good way to get it done efficiently and have the manpower to do that while everything else is going on. I wish we did, we just don't. So
that's been my hesitancy as well, as we just don't have a good way to put it on efficiently. It's been a bottleneck for us, even though I see the potential benefit.
Yeah, that's where we're at too. I have a good friend of mine that does quite a significant amount of acres, and they have focused on it, and they bought a Tebby cart that holds 10 tons, and they put a ton of side dress on an acre, and they have really good yield. So I can't say it doesn't work. I think it does really work.
Mm-hmm. There's another question in the chat about what time of year do you apply manure, and what type of spreaders do you use to apply the manure, wagon or truck mounted? Yeah,
so we apply manure. We try to apply it at this time of year, but with how much we have to do, we do start in the fall, probably that November, December timeframe, when things are pretty well not frozen up, but well enough they're not going to heat up again. We don't like to put it all on in the fall, so we might do 1/3 and then 2/3 right now. We're hauling right now. And so I try to push in the spring. If time isn't an issue, push it into the spring. I think you have better action there, but getting it on right and getting it on without having snow on the ground and it being really cold that nobody wants to be out there is probably more important to us. And so that's the answer. And then I was going to the other question. What we use to apply it is a pull spreader, and we had a Chandler with just it was a simple one. I spread about 8,000 tons with it. And a $9,000 spreader is the first spreader it actually probably built our farm, to be honest with you. I don't know if I'll ever sell it because it got us through the first 5 years, and a $9,000 spreader that probably saved us $70,000 of spreading costs. This year we're actually going up to a Tebi that has vertical beaters and then has the horizontal beaters at the bottom. So you can do a lot with a little in spreading if you're patient and you're willing to work with it.
And do you immediately incorporate the manure?
We do not immediately incorporate manure, and this is probably one thing. I mean, for us, what you're going to lose in manure not incorporating is lost in the first 30 seconds, is what I've been told. Now I don't have any data or science to back that up, so don't take that as that's just what I've understood. And so unless you're falling right behind it with the disc and everything, that doing it a day or two later is not going to have a big effect on it.
And Kurt asks, oh, sorry, Bryce, go ahead.
No, yeah. So I don't know if that's true. Some people, I would love to hear what other people have to think on that, but that's just what I've been taught.
And Kurt asks, I think I might have let him in late, and I really apologize. I gave Bryce host duties and their host responsibilities. I didn't realize how that was going to affect my ability to let people in. And you covered this a bit already, but I also pressed the record late because of that issue with host. But Kurt's asking about if you just quickly can talk again about micronutrients. And using composted turkey litter, how would that maybe affect the micronutrient considerations?
Yeah. So every manure is different. We don't use turkey, so I don't know what the average type of iron, manganese, zinc, whatever's in there. So I can't comment on that. But for us, we have very low micronutrients in our turkey manure and very low micronutrients across most of the fields that we pick up, because nobody really applies them, or if it is, most of them are applying them in the easy manner of putting them in a liquid. And now you're talking about a few ounces per acre. And we like the pounds per acre. And so we take the test of sulfur, zinc, manganese, iron, copper, boron, and we will correct these if they're low. And if we go back to this test of sulfur, you can see is low, and our manganese is low, and our boron is low. So we're putting on a sulfate manganese product that will be put on 100 pounds an acre, which will give us, I think, about 80 pounds or 70 pounds of sulfur of actual product and 10 to 15 pounds of manganese. Then we'll put on about 15 to 20 pounds of boron, which will be about 2.5 pounds of actual boron per acre on there. And so it's really hard without seeing the manure analysis, and maybe they're feeding copper, or maybe it's not copper. I don't know what it is. That something's high that you could utilize that you wouldn't have to purchase in micronutrients to supplement that. So it really comes down to reading the test, understanding what's in the soil, and then what is in the products you're using.
Oh, thanks for going back to that.
Perfect. So this is one thing that I like to show. It's with the rotation. Our alfalfa rotation over a 3-year net income this is a total one, so $1,450 an acre, just say $500 an acre is what we're looking at on the net income. We have up and down years, as you can see when we're transitioning alfalfa or establishing alfalfa, but we have way better yields, 20 to 30 bushels better on average coming corn after alfalfa. And so one of the things that I like to do is take our data out, and then I put together a corn soybean rotation, and we have pretty good data to show the yields go down year over year on an organic corn, organic soybean only rotation, and the costs go up. And so in a 3-year, we're making $50, probably $50 more an acre on that 3-year net income than we are with the rotation. Probably, I would say doing 2 to 3 times as much work on our farm. So just one thing I always like to bring up, rotation is 50% of that fertility, and doing things easier can be almost as profitable, if not more profitable, figuring in all your costs and inputs. So again, those are the numbers from our farm that we've seen. So next, Aaron, I will go into kind of break down the fertility by crop, what we're doing. We have a baseline, and then we will go through each crop here. So in our barley, we will grow some barley this year. We will put about 2 tons of chicken manure on it. We usually have a base of sulfur and a base of boron, and that changes per crop: soybeans, corn, or small grain, or alfalfa. Put about 40 pounds of sulfur on it, about 5 pounds of boron on it. And the other thing that we have got into is the neem oil. I have done quite a bit of research on it. We use neem oil as a fungicide, insecticide type of situation. We don't use it blanketly, but that is what we will use on top of it for crop protection. So again, you'll see these don't change a lot, but the base is chicken manure, sulfur, boron, and neem oil for most of our crops. All right, so this should, I apologize, this should say corn. And I put it in here and I didn't save on it. And what we have is we have a base, we use 2 to 5 tons of chicken manure. And of our micros here, we're going to put 100 pounds of sulfur, 15 to 20 pounds of boron, and then a quart of neem oil. And I see a question in there, Aaron. It says neem oil doesn't kill bugs, does it? And it is actually labeled, I shouldn't say labeled, it actually will kill bugs. We used it. What was the stuff that came into alfalfa last year in the fall?
The army worms?
The army worms. It stopped the army worms.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty broad spectrum insecticide.
It is. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
So yep, that's our corn is that 2 to 5 tons, 100 pounds of sulfur, 200 pounds of, or 20 pounds of boron, which will be about 2 pounds of actual product, and a quart of neem oil. And again, I just put the soil test up here to go over. This was the corn soil test that you've seen before. It's the actual field, and that field actually had about 5 tons of manure, 100 pounds of sulfur, with 20 pounds of boron and the manganese on it as well, to cover all of our bases. And so we're going in and correcting it at this point, as well as ag line. So don't have to stick on this one much. We went over it, but I just want to attach it to that field as we go over that fertility. Just to kind of look at our planning here, this is the same field. Is we have the chicken manure spread January 15th. We had a nice warm days during that time there. And so we had dry spreading that will happen. Actually, we have it planned for May 2nd, but it's probably going to happen today or tomorrow. The boron, the tiger manganese, sulfur or manganese in there. And then we'll come with the disking and planting, and then all the way into the fungicide season of putting on neem oil. So just the breakdown of how we plan and plan everything out on it. And then organic alfalfa, not much changes on this one, 2 tons. We do make a compost. We just started this year. It is food waste, high in nutrients, and cattle manure composted together, heated up. That's the thing that we've done to make alfalfa a little bit more bearable to put the cost into it. Is 2 tons of compost, 40 pounds of sulfur, 10 pounds of boron, and then we will usually do neem oil every spring, as we have been having large issues that with army worms, leaf hoppers in the spring, that we feel it's worth just taking care of them up front, or doing as much as we can up front before we wait to see those, because it's been a year-over-year thing for us. So organic soybeans, we do sulfur at 40 pounds, boron at 10 pounds, and then we always plant in neem oil. We don't use it as a blanket, but if we need it, we'll have it. We do not put any P and K on, namely because I don't want to put manure on. I don't want to stimulate weeds in there. And usually we over apply the P and K for the corn or whatever is before that we will have extra P and K that should suffice in the soybeans. But the biggest thing is we do not want to put the nitrogen into the ground to stimulate weed growth. We want to keep that as small as possible. Question is how.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there's a question for you about how the neem oil is applied.
Yeah, so we spray it on and we'll fly it on with a plane, ground rig and plane. We'll mix it with water to get the right amount. So execution, there's a lot of products out there, and I feel just traveling around the country, execution is one of the biggest obstacles to doing the most, what I say, the correct thing. People often have to settle to do what is okay and not what is exactly right, because a lot of the things that we apply products with don't exist on a mass scale that you could call somebody up if you don't have it. Then you have to have enough acres to have it to justify the cost of it being around. And so execution is a huge component of our fertility program. And we've sacrificed during the years while we didn't have enough capital to purchase things that we would like to have, that we now have, so we can do a few more aspects of the fertility program. And so one of the things that we just purchased is a Kuhn 5.2 dry fertilizer spreader. It's for micronutrients, and it will spread 2 pounds up to 800 pounds in there. So we can spread very, very low rates of micronutrients and variable rate them and be able to do that. As well as this is the idea that we have for doing side dressing. We're not going to go out and put a ton on with it because it's not going to hold that, but putting extra 500 pounds, having an auger truck that loads directly into it is something that I can see that would be feasible to have 2 people do and not be a laborious burden on us. And so this is one of the biggest purchases. Again, it's not cheap. It's effective for us, and it really helps us to do the micronutrients now. The other thing that we've just purchased is a Tebi manure spreader. These are really nice because we can buy cheaper manure that may be a little bit wetter, that's not handled by a lot of other manure spreaders. We can go from 1 ton, or I think it goes down to half a ton, all the way up to 20 ton. We can do lime and chicken manure both with it. So these are the big things that has made the organic fertility executable for us to do when we need to do them right, and to be able to use the products that we want to use, or these 2 purchases for our farm. So the takeaways for me is a well thought out plan can be the difference between success and failure. I've seen that on our own farm. How you move chicken manure, where you store it, where you buy it from, how many backup plans you have, how you get micronutrients. I've seen 50 to 80% difference in cost of micronutrients depending on where you get it from, how you utilize it. Each region will have different options for fertility, but the principle of the NPK and S and base saturation stay the same in varying amounts per crop and soil. It's utilizing the fertility you have in the region that you are the best way possible. And that's what we've done over a wide region where we're at. We're using food waste, we're using cow manure now that we can compost and decay the weed seed. We're using chicken manure and crop rotation to lower our cost on here. New fertility options cost a lot of time and work and really have the significant impact in the long term. So trialing things on a small scale, understanding if they work, and understanding if they're going to be viable in the future without putting them across your whole farm. There's a lot of fertility products out there, and a lot of them for us have been break even on it. And biologicals are my thing is nobody has any idea in quantifiable terms what they actually do. I think there is merit to them. I think there will be a place for them. We try them on our farm. They're not going to solve issues where you're not going to be able to use, or where you don't have to use nutrients anymore. You're still going to have to put nutrients in the soil. Maybe at some point in the future, we see biological where we can start replacing that and hard nutrients, but I don't see that data right now. I don't see that long term. But that's one of the things I see is people use biologicals to replace good hard fertility. And I just don't see the science there in our farm to do that yet. Evaluating cost of nutrients and creating increasing availability of nutrients within a cycle. So understanding how crop rotations interact with your nutrient costs and how nutrients become available in the cycle can really save a lot of money and heartache and weeds pressure and top end yields if we really control that 1 to 5 year nutrient management plan. So Aaron, that is what I have. I don't know if there's anything else you'd like me to go into.
Yeah, I have a couple other questions just to build upon that biological question. We were talking about in soil fertility. It's our few lectures on soil fertility and soil health in our undergraduate class for organic agriculture. And we were talking a bit about soil biology yesterday in class and just how much we still don't really understand about just the complex ecology of the soil and what we're looking for in terms of an optimal soil microbial community and how that varies across our diverse soil types and regions. And that's where I guess I'm in the same camp as you, Bryce. I mean, I still am coming in with an open mind in terms of the value of these products. We certainly have microbials that are applied as foliars that are valuable additions to our ability to manage plant health and can be used for disease and insect management. But in the complex ecology of the soil, where there's is so much difference in terms of soil types and where we are, I'm just a bit skeptical that there is a single product that's going to be able to have benefit across all environments, which is why I think you're stressing this as well of doing some more established trials on your farm, and not just in 1 year, where you're really deliberately observing what's happening, so that you can understand more of the value of that practice. And I also put in the chat a article I found for class, which I thought was really interesting, that just really stressing the relationship between plants and the soil environment. And one figure, and if you've heard me give talks this past conference season, I've been mentioning this in a lot of my talks, but it's a figure that I heard in a talk this past fall that I thought was really striking, that 20 to 30% of the carbohydrates that a plant fixes is actually returned back into the soil, which I really think highlights that very complex, intricate, and deliberate relationship between the plant and the soil biology, that the plants wouldn't be expending that much energy to fix carbohydrate if there wasn't a reason, a benefit of putting that energy back into the soil to foster the soil microbial environment. But that's too where I think that, like what you're saying, Bryce, that diverse soil, that the diverse plant community, whether it be through cover crops or other means, is likely a very effective way of fostering soil biology in a way that it's promoting nutrient cycling and the functioning of the soil. So it's kind of just a long-winded commentary, but not to say that I don't think there could be value in some of these soil biological enhancements, but I too wonder if there's other agronomic ways that we might be able to foster that in probably a more site appropriate way. I also get concerned when we're applying a lot of biologicals, and we know with other well-intentioned introductions of beneficial insects and organisms that they can become invasive. And I think that should also be considered when we're thinking of adding microbes as well, that they may not be necessarily suited for a particular environment, or at least we just should be aware and thinking of that whenever we're introducing a new organism to the environment, there could be unintended consequences that we should be aware of.
I agree 100% with you, Aaron. I I think they're worth looking into it and understanding them, but to rely on a farm to take things away to use those, I'm not there yet.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Rye makes the comment that biologicals may have more of a visible effect on depleted, unhealthy soil, and that could be the case for sure. That if there's a soil where it's been either through the soil type, or it's been really intensively conventionally farmed and is really lacking in biologicals. But you also have to think that too, and I think Bryce, with respect to the alfalfa, I mean, not only is that beneficial for other aspects, but legumes are such a powerful tool to fostering soil biology. And we're not going to be able to get that biology revved up if we're not giving them their food that they need, as well as creating that physical environment for them. So when we think about adding these, we also have to think about creating an environment where they can thrive through adding legumes into the rotation, more of these perennial phases to start out with, and adding these diverse cover crops that are feeding the biology.
Mm-hmm.
And this was mentioned in the chat. I know you don't use them, but are there any products of for nitrogen fertility in corn? I was going to ask that too, maybe in a little bit different way. If you could reflect on with the farmers that you've worked with, other products besides manure that people are using specifically for corn. Manure is sometimes in short supply, that the cost is higher this year. Have you seen people use other approaches for nitrogen fertility in corn?
Yeah, there's other approaches. They're not. I say this is an overarching thing. They won't be cheaper than manure, but I have an individual that I work with that has sandier soil. He can still do very, very good organic corn. And we have figured out that bone meal for him is actually pretty cost effective, because applying a bunch of chicken manure up front can be easily lost. And so having a product that bone meal is pretty expensive. On our farms in Iowa, how our soils interact, probably not going to be cost effective, but bone meal has seemed to work out pretty good, pretty well for him. We're going to use it again this year, not as a complete nutrient or nitrogen source, but I have seen where it does work for him. And his cost just changed. He has very cheap land, so he can put more into the nutrients. I have very expensive land, so I can't put as much into the nutrients. And so I've seen bone meal work. I was not a fan because of the cost, but I think there is great places to utilize that depending on where you're at. There are some products out there that I think are still up in the air in terms of do they work, like a Blue In, something that creates nitrogen again. There's a big buzz about it all last year. I haven't seen much data come back or a lot of our individuals using that again. So it tells me something that without even asking, that it might not have worked, and I don't know that. So
there's actually discussion of Blue End in the chat, and we were hoping to do some trials. And Tim mentioned this in the chat. I think the issue was maybe less of it working and more of this issue from at least our ability to source the product for experiments, was that Corteva bought the rights to Blue End, and that they didn't continue with the marketing of the product, and if they have any plans to do that in the future. But I had heard that from a few farmers I worked with that did do some initial trials, that they did seem to see a yield boost. So I'm not clear on all the dynamics as to Tim said it was rebranded as Nutritia, and whether or not the way it was reformulated, if it's still allowed in organic. I should get clarification on exactly what's happening there. But my impression is that the lack of availability had to do with this purchase of the rights to the product by Corteva.
That's good information, because I did not understand that dynamic, and so I haven't looked into it. So I can't say if it works or not either. I just know there's a big buzz about it, and then it kind of died off. So
yeah, I might have to try to. I'm getting some good information in the chat. Greg mentioned that it costs $13 an acre. And I might have to try to source it again so we can do some trials here in Wisconsin. But yeah, last year when we were getting set to do them, we were having issues with being able to source the product. But maybe that's been resolved over the past year. but there isn't a lot of data. So just again, one of those things of proceed with caution, but another approach that is probably worth looking into a bit more. So Greg's putting in some good information about that. Back to the question about other sources of nitrogen fertility, and I'm not remembering exactly how we did this, but maybe I'll have to ask him and send the information to the group. We gave a OU, an organic university, at the Moses conference with Joel Groover and Andy Ambriel and Paul Hoffman this past week, and Andy was commenting on how he actually uses soybean meal as a source of nitrogen fertility. And I believe that they use some soybean byproduct that is actually grown on their own farm and then returned to their farm. And they found that quite effective in terms of adding nitrogen fertility back. So another option of potentially using something that's more cycling resources on the farm, using a nitrogen fixer and getting around having to source a manure product. So I'll try to get more clarification from Andy on exactly how he's doing that. But I thought that was an interesting approach, because I think any approach that's looking at manure certainly can be valuable, but certainly, again, is not necessarily always available and can be expensive. Lots of other
I think,
questions. Oh, go ahead, Bryce.
Yeah, the other thing that I'm diving into, and this is probably where I get a little bit more in the sky of you have to believe it works, and then if you look at the hardcore numbers, like I've always done, compost. I think we are composting food waste with manure and seeing some pretty incredible things out of that. The numbers can be large depending on what we use in terms of NP and K, but we can also have low numbers and seem to get a good response out of it too.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I've seen too, Bryce. Not necessarily, I haven't done a lot of work in it, but talking to farmers and seeing other data that there seems to be another enhancing effect with compost, and whether that is acting upon just the fostering of the soil biology, that there's something in the compost, whether it be micronutrients or other growth related compounds, but there's beyond just the NP and K level, which can be quite low in compost, it gives some sort of synergistic effect where the benefits of compost are beyond what you'd necessarily anticipate from the nutrient analysis and nutrient composition of the product.
Exactly what we are seeing too. And I think the biggest thing that we've done is we've hired an individual that understands composting and doing it right.
Exactly. That I thought that came up too in some conference talk that I was at this past week, that it's a process that you need to be understanding what you're doing, and there's certain organizations and companies that are kind of provide guidance on that, but to get that really amplified effect like you're observing, you have to put attention into doing it right. Ryan mentioned that they're using Nature Safe 1300 as a side dress at V4 at 200 pounds per acre. It's a combination of featherbone and blood meal, and applying 2 to 2.5 tons of layer manure in the fall, an additional ton in the spring on irrigated fields. Yeah, I'm really interested in using that side dress practice, particularly on some of our organic no-till and cover crop interseeding plots. So it's a thank you for that recommendation of that product. So Bruce is asking, can green manure be the only manure needed to grow corn? Maybe 2 years of clover alfalfa in my rotation, and trying to figure out from it if he can grow his own fertility. We've found that 2 to 3 years of alfalfa can supply adequate end to corn, but what is your experience been, Bryce?
Yeah, 3 years of alfalfa. I think 2 might be short. It's something when 2 years of alfalfa does not have the same effect as 3 years, and it's not a 1-to-1 type of situation. It's like 25% to 100% when you go to from year 2 to have a 3 full year stand of alfalfa. But a 3 year stand of alfalfa with decent growing weather can produce 160, 180 bushel corn with nothing added to it. Now, the caveat of that is you are taking a lot of P and K off with your alfalfa that becomes my big concern of depleting the soil of P and K.
Rye is asking the rate at which you spread the compost.
Yeah, so we are a 1-to-1 mix of cattle manure to food waste, and so it's about a 2-ton spread.
Have you ever done, or any of the farmers you've worked with, done any work on foliar applications of nutrients?
I do have individuals that work with it, quite a bit of foliar applications. My feeling of it is that I like pounds of product. I like it in the soil. I like to build the soil up, and so I don't utilize it very much. So it's hard for me to comment on some of the foliar applications just because I don't use them on our farm. I'm not saying they don't work. I think there's cases where they do work, but I think, again, for my thought process is I want to correct the problem for the long term instead of for the short term.
And Mark is asking, what is your yearly and long-term strategy for 25% magnesium-based saturation in soils?
Yeah, so if I have 25, I am putting a fair amount of sulfur on. Sulfur combines in the soil and makes Epsom salt. And correct me if I'm wrong here, and that's what I've learned, but it makes Epsom salt and it leaches through the soil. Having good sulfur in that soil will drop that actually pretty quickly. I have an individual that was sitting at 22 to 25% with good sulfur over 7 years. He got it down to 14, 15%. And we're actually a little scared that it might drop lower, which is not good.
Tiger 90. Rye, I have no idea what you mean by Tiger 90. Feel free to unmute and talk about it.
And the Tiger 90 is the sulfur that we use.
Oh, okay. Okay. I missed
Tiger
that.
Sol 90% sulfur. We are spreading that on corn 100 pounds an acre right now. And we are spreading on soybeans about 40 to 50, alfalfa 40 to 50, and small grains about 40 to 50 pounds per acre. We are pretty high. We bought this last fall, and so we got a pretty good deal on it. And with the corn prices the way they are, we want to make sure we have enough. And as we build, you can't ever really build long-term sulfur in the soil, but you can get it to where you don't have to apply as much every year type of situation. And so we will probably drop that down over the next 5 years on fields that get sulfur every year.
And it's a mined product.
Yep. Organically approved. The Tiger Sol is there's quite a few micronutrients out there, companies. Tiger Sol has good micronutrients. They have 7 organic approved, one that covers a vast majority of the micronutrients you use. But as again, I'll remind you, always get them okayed by the certifier. Not all micronutrients can just be used when you want to. You have to do certain processes and systems to use those.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other questions? Have you, over the brainstorm kind of questions, is it possible to put sulfur in the soil by growing brassicas? I mean, you would have to be there, and this is a microbial question that I'm not sure of. That's a good question. Are there certain, you'd have to be able to have some sort of, just like nitrogen. There's really, I guess there's a couple different ways we can think about adding, how plants can actively add nutrients to the soil. One is through symbiotic relationships, and nitrogen fixation is certainly one of them, and probably the primary one, where the bacteria are fixing nitrogen. The other one is like the relationship that we see with like buckwheat, where there's not necessarily that the plants themselves aren't actively creating those nutrients, but what certain plants are able to do is unlock those nutrients. So whether it's being able to bring up nutrients from deeper in the soil profile, or through means which we don't necessarily completely understand. And maybe that's part of this complex relationship of these plants with the microbial communities, and they're fostering certain microbial communities that are able to mineralize and biologically release different nutrients. so buckwheat and phosphorus is the one that I can think of, but I don't know if brassicas, if there's been any research to demonstrate that they can either make sulfur more available. They certainly have a lot of sulfur within the plant tissue, but I think those are kind of two things to think about when we're thinking about how plants can make nutrients more available to our crop plants. That's what are they bring up sulfur because of the smell? That's a good question. I don't know. I'll have to look into that more. You know, is there evidence that brassicas are somehow activating the availability of sulfur in the soil? It's an interesting question. Suzanne's asking, what is your standard crop rotation?
Yeah, the standard one is 3 to 4 years of alfalfa, 1 year of corn. And we might throw a year of soybeans in it in a year like this, where we'll do a few acres of soybeans. We'll have 400 or 500 acres of soybeans this year. But usually it's alfalfa and corn. Sometimes we'll start the alfalfa with barley if we have a decent market for that.
And Tom is mentioning that a straight run alfalfa should have other plants interseeded into it to get a balanced soil profile of going into corn. I like to use my regular planter and plant warm season varieties into the alfalfa the year before organic corn after the first cut. That is an interesting comment. Have you done any diversification of those alfalfa stands, Bryce?
No, and I agree with the science and the thinking there. The issue with us is the people that purchase our alfalfa want straight alfalfa. And we take a cutting off in the spring before we plant corn, and then tear it up and plant corn at the end of May. And so for us, it just we would give up $400 or $500 an acre to do that. We'd have to look at it to see if that would make sense.
And one thing, and correct me if I'm wrong in remembering this, so you don't necessarily feel like you need to sell that alfalfa on an organic market, that there's enough value overall in the crop rotation that if it needs to be sold conventionally, that it still is value in terms of its contributions to fertility and weed management.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, your organic and conventional alfalfa markets are within $5-10 a ton.
Yeah. But I think that's sometimes, at least my mindset is it has to be sold organic, but it's overall, especially when you see that the lesser price difference between organic and conventional, considering the other value. It's not just thinking, is it giving a premium on organic, but what is the other value it's bringing? Oh, Ted, I missed this, Ted, earlier. Ted's asking to clarify, and I wish I knew if people know more from other states, including Wisconsin, is the requirement to immediately incorporate poultry manure? Is it not a requirement from the certifiers in Iowa? And I thought that would probably be more of a state nutrient management requirement than an organic certification requirement, but I don't know if you can comment on that, Bryce, or I think Sarah Tedeschi was on, if from a certifier standpoint, if there's aspects of the regulation that dictate incorporation of manure.
In our certifier, again, I haven't read this specific rule, but we've been doing this for 7 years and putting it to exactly how it's going on in our field, and it's never been an issue. It's never even been talked about. So from that standpoint, it hasn't been a rule from them. Now, maybe they are overlooking that rule, or I don't know. So it hasn't been an issue in Iowa. And as far as the state, chicken manure does not have to be incorporated.
And that may be part of a gray area in certification, that it could be up to the discretion of the certifier. I'm just guessing if that is something your certifier is bringing up, but it also could be something that's more specific from a state nutrient management standpoint. What are your yields in alfalfa?
The yields vary significantly. Some years will be 7 ton. Last year was more around that 4 ton, just because we were dry, but alfalfa is one of the most amazing crops to market because the government keeps their hands out of it. And if you have low yielding crops, alfalfa is worth more. If you have high yielding crops, it's worth less. It seems to balance out, and it always seems to have a decent profitability to it. So it's actually a pretty fun crop to market because it's not gigantic. It's not like the conventional corn soybean markets that have so many influences on it.
And Rye's asking, what tillage do you do on the alfalfa before corn? That is always a question. How do you successfully incorporate alfalfa in terms of tools and timing, fall versus spring tillage?
Yeah, and this is one thing that I haven't wrapped my head around working with people across the country is what we do. People think is crazy that it actually works. We go in with a disc, we disc about 4 inches deep, 3 to 4 inches deep, and then we field finish it about 2.5 inches deep to clip the crown roots of the alfalfa. And we probably don't have more than 2-3% come back. And we go in and we cut the alfalfa, we bale it, we'll disc it, we'll field finish it, we'll plant it all within probably a week. And it works in our soil. I know a lot of people that I work with said that would never work for them. They'd have a better alfalfa stand when they didn't disc it. And so that's what we do, but I understand it doesn't work for everybody.
So Sarah, if you're still on, the question was, is there a requirement with respect to the National Organic Program regarding the timing of incorporation of manure, specifically poultry manure? We often broadcast poultry manure and don't incorporate it.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're a little soft, but
I wonder if it's this. Is this better?
that's better. That's better.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. And no, there is not. You know, maybe there should be. It's possible different certifiers have different policies around that, but in terms of the standard from the National Organic Program, there is nothing that requires that. I think it still leans towards best practices, so we'd like to see that, but there isn't anything to enforce timing of incorporation of manure or poultry litter or whatever. Is that the question? Did I?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, Ted, I don't. Yep, I think that's it. Ted, let us know if that answers the question. We broadcast poultry manure on top of our organic no-till plots and don't incorporate it. Which is why I'd like to go to side dressing, because I do think it's a better practice, both from an efficiency and nitrogen use standpoint, as well from an environmental standpoint. But we've not been questioned about in certification. But again, that may be whether it's a nuance of your certifier, whether that has to do with something related to the Illinois standard. All right. Mark is asking, and Mark, feel free to unmute too if I'm not capturing this right. Question on the energy of composting and your new precision spreader.
Bryce, we get poultry litter in, and then we'll put that in the base of your precision spreader. We had one, a Kuhn Knight, that was similar. You know, it mixes vertically and then drops it onto those precision pans to give a uniform spread, which is just a really wonderful spreader. So my question is, you know, it's really energy intensive to compost. So is it worth it to ram all that manure through a composting system, or would we be better off just putting the base layer in the manure spreader and top dressing, you know, that spreader with compost? It seems like, you know, beyond 400 or 500 pounds of compost, maybe there isn't a huge value. You know, we're getting the bugs we need and the other things. So what do you think we're getting lots of benefit by composting your food waste and the manure? Because it's really labor and energy intensive. And I wonder if we can get the same benefit by utilizing those new spreaders. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question, because the normal way of composting is a lot of energy, time, and commitment. We have gone to getting the products that we're getting. It doesn't, we're going through the pile once and aerating it and letting it sit. We're looking at some microbes that maybe we don't even have to go through it. We'll mix them in together on a line and have microbes, if we can get them organically approved, that will do the work for us that we can put on top of it. We have a very large composting partner in Florida that takes all the waste out of Disney World and doesn't even turn it once and makes compost that goes in the bag that goes to Walmart. So I think there's a lot of different aspects to do it. And we are just starting to get into that we're learning and understanding it, because using a compost turner and going through it 5 to 10 times is not going to pay. It just, you're going to use way too much time and energy for what you're going to get a return on it without replacing that. So I think for us, the thing is, how do we do it better with less energy through that? And we haven't applied lower amounts of compost to know if we're over applying it right now. We're still in the phase of getting the compost as good as we can. And then that might be the next question, is if 500 pounds is the right rate for us.
Something you might want to consider is adding some native fence line soil to your composting.
Mm-hmm. No, but I've seen a lot of people do that.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I was just hearing about that too as a beneficial practice, Mark, kind of inoculating with those native bacteria, kind of like we were talking about earlier. That's a great idea. Other questions? All right. If not, I'll thank Bryce for again joining us. He's always such a great presenter at our workshops. Oh, another question from Kurt. How much N is lost if the manure isn't incorporated? I've heard that the strong smell of manure is ammonia volatilizing off. Maybe this is incorrect.
Go ahead, Erin.
There can be some loss, but I'm not remembering off the top of my head. I certainly can look that up and get back to you, Kurt.
My understanding, and again, this is from the person that sold me chicken manure, so you can take it as how you want it. The ammonia that will volatilize off once you spread it happens very, very quickly. The rest, the other stuff is very slow. And so that's what I've learned, is it's the point of getting it in the 20 minutes after you spread it. You're not going to do it anyway. So there is value to long-term having it incorporated, but the short-term, it's not, you're going to lose what you lose no matter what. So that's what I know. I'm not saying it's correct.
I'll have to look a bit more into that myself. Get back to you guys. Other last questions? All right. Well, thank you all for joining and your great questions and discussion. And thank you, Bryce. And we have a couple more workshops coming up, one looking at disease management. And speaking of which, actually, I'll throw this out to you guys. There's an opportunity to engage in some on-farm research related to organically allowed treatments for tar spot and some wheat cereal grain diseases too. So if you guys have issues with white mold on soybeans or tar spot or cereal grain diseases and want to be involved in trialing some of these products, let me know. So we're talking about that in a couple of weeks, and then crop insurance. So, and then we'll get into our planning our summer field days. So keep an eye out for those too. We have some great sites that we're lining up, and we're excited to see y'all in person this summer. So have a great weekend, everyone. Looks like a weekend to get back out into the field, or at least outside, getting ready to be back out in the field. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. Bye.